Hi, this is Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Welcome to the weekly Top 3, the top 3 things on our mind here at Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets for the week of June 16th, 2025. The weekly Top 3 is a regular segment on The Michael Dukes Show. The show broadcasts on both Facebook Live and YouTube Live, as well as via streaming audio from the show's website, weekdays from 6 to 8 a.m. I join Michael weekly in the first hour of Tuesday's show from 6:10 to 7 a.m. for a discussion between the two of us about our 3 issues. We post the podcast of our discussion following the show on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, also on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets website, as well as the project's page on national blog site, medium.com. You can find past episodes of the weekly Top 3 also at the same locations. Keep in mind that in addition to these podcasts, during the week, you can also follow and participate in the discussion with us of these and other issues affecting Alaska's fiscal and economic conditions by following us on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook page and through our posts on Twitter. This week, our top 3 issues are these. First, we discuss where oil prices are likely headed and how Alaska could reduce the fiscal roller coaster our current budgetary approach creates. Second, we discuss one issue that we believe should be at the heart of the coming Education Task Force and its subsequent recommendations. And third, we examine what a recent decision by JERA, Japan's largest LNG importer, means for Alaska LNG. And now, let's join Michael.
All right, well, let's tackle this. Oil prices. We know that next year there's a predicted $1.5 billion budget, and that was based off some higher oils. And then oil started to tank, and looked like it was going to slide down into the 50s. And then, of course, Israel and Iran got into their little thing, and so now it's, man, I feel like I'm on a roller coaster. This is like an e-ticket ride at Disneyland. What is where are oil prices going? What does it mean for us?
Well, this is the segment that I'm absolutely going to get wrong because, predicting oil prices is a fool's errand.
Right.
And I'm not really trying to predict the precise price. That would truly be a fool's errand. But I think it's useful to talk about some fundamentals that we see in the oil markets that are useful to remind ourselves of when these roller coasters get going. And the fundamentals are the fundamental is price is set by supply and demand. We always have to keep that in mind, that we can have all of these things going on in the world. We can have all of the bombs going off, or we can have all of the tariffs that are out there in the world. That was the story last week before this started. Going on out there, but it's fundamental supply and demand, and the fundamental supply side of this is that Saudi has increased production over the last few months. They've raised the OPEC ceiling over the last few months. Additional supply has come onto the market, and that additional supply has softened price. Because demand hasn't moved much, that additional supply has softened price in a way that got us down into the 60s. What's going on with Israel, Iran is what always goes on when you have something like this in the Middle East. It's concern about supply. Is there going to be some activity that disrupts supply in a way that sends us back to 1973, the Saudi oil embargo, or 1979, the Iran Revolution, that seriously disrupts supply in a way that forces price up. And what I think we're seeing is that for all of the attacks that are going on, for all of the damage that's going on, supply really isn't being impacted. Israel seems to have gone out of its way not to attack Iran's export capabilities. They've attacked energy inside Iran but it's domestic energy. It's internal energy focused that Israel has attacked. They've not attacked Iran's export pipelines or Iran's export terminals. And Iran, for all of the bluster and all of the things that it says, has not disrupted shipping in the Arabian Gulf, which if it did would have extreme impacts on supply, but it hasn't done that. And so what I think we're seeing is the market going, okay, there's risk here, and we're continuing to assess the risk that this will ramp up in some way. But I think the market is sort of being capped off by the realization that there's not been supply disruptions to this point. There was an FT article, Financial Times article, that I think was very insightful on this point. And it has a paragraph that I think is useful to read and keep in mind. The interplay of geopolitical uncertainty, oil prices, and macroeconomics is rarely straightforward, as some useful research from the European Central Bank published in 2023 indicates. It points out that Brent crude prices leapt by 5% in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 as investors priced in the chance of war in the Middle East disrupting supplies. But they were down 25%, but oil prices were down 25% within 14 days of 9/11 as fears that a slowing global economy would weaken oil demand came to the fore. In the 2 weeks following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Brent prices rose by 30%, but they were back at their pre-invasion level 8 weeks later. So I think the lesson we take from this, or the lesson that the market takes from this, is when there's an event that is in a major supply region or in a major demand region, when there is an event that could theoretically put supply or demand at risk, the market's going to react and it's going to jump, and it's going to jump either one way or the other in response to that event. But as the smoke clears, to use a probably inappropriate metaphor, but as the smoke clears and you begin to see whether there is actual damage to supply or damage to demand, the market sort of readjusts. And we're seeing that to some degree in the markets. I pulled up the markets this morning, and the December 25 or the midpoint 2020 or midpoint fiscal year 26, which is the way we think about it in Alaska. The midpoint fiscal year 26 oil price right now, as of this moment, futures price is $71. The midpoint FY27, the year after that, is $68. So I think you see the market sort of still hiked up as a result of these concerns about whether there's going to be a disruption to supply, but not overly spiked, not convinced there's going to be a long-term disruption to supply. And I think you've also seen it sort of coming off the highs it spiked to shortly after the beginning of the Israeli attack on Iraq. So we're in for a continued roller coaster. Yesterday, the big news was that there were ships on fire in the state of, in the Arabian Gulf, and all of a sudden, oh my God, there's been an attack. We're going to start seeing these attacks on shipping in the Gulf, and as a consequence, there's going to be disruption of supply. Well, as the day wore on, it turned out that what had happened is two ships had collided. There wasn't an attack,
right?
And while the collision may have been a result of navigational disruption due to the war, it didn't look like it was persisting. That navigational disruption was going to persist in a way that was going to put shipping generally at risk. So you're going to see these spikes during a day, or maybe even during a week. But long term, it's supply and demand. And long term, OPEC has increased supply, which is what led to the softening of price into the 60s, and some people talking about going into the 50s. OPEC has increased supply. They haven't backed off that. as a result of this. And so I think you're going to see, if there's no additional activity as a result of the war that results in damage to supply, I think you're going to see prices continue to soften back to toward the levels that we were at before the war started, as time goes on.
What does this mean for Alaska? I mean, and when you say see the prices soften, again, Trump's vision and goal was oil in the mid to low 50s. And of course, we weren't there yet. I think we before the war spiked, it was down to what, 64 or something like that. So we weren't quite there yet. But what does it mean for Alaska?
I think it means that unfortunately, that the spring unfortunately from a revenue standpoint, unfortunately from a budgetary standpoint, I'm always reminded by friends that it means different things on the gasoline side. But unfortunately, from the budgetary side, I think we're going to see prices come back down into the 60s, unless there's some serious supply disruption, long-term supply disruption that starts occurring as a result of the war. I think we're going to see prices start to come back down where they were before, which sort of reflected the pre-war supply-demand balance. And if the war is not resulting in a significant supply disruption, I think we're going to see it come back down into that range that it was, which is in the 60s. And the market's going to sit there waiting for OPEC to see if OPEC continues to raise the levels. What is going on with OPEC is, during COVID, OPEC brought its caps down significantly, restricted supply significantly, in an effort to, as COVID destroyed demand, in an effort to balance supply demand at a price point that was in the 70s. And so OPEC brought the caps down. What we've been seeing over the last few months is OPEC bringing the caps back up, essentially to pre-COVID levels. And they aren't finished doing that yet. They've sort of brought it up part of the way, but they haven't finished doing that. So I think what we'll see is prices come back down. If there's no long-term supply disruption coming out of the war, I think we'll see prices come back into the 60s, sort of settle back into the 60s, and they'll sort of sit there waiting on what OPEC's going to do next in terms of continuing to lift the caps back to pre-COVID levels. So the short answer is, I think we're going to continue to see budget softness in Alaska.
So no quick fix to our budget woes for next year with that deficit, because we'll probably be back here within a few weeks if this conflict doesn't escalate or attack any of the supply lines or anything else. So, all right, interesting stuff. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. This was actually one of the things that I was wondering about as this attack came out. I was thinking, what does this do to oil prices? I mean, that sounds a little cruel, but I'm just like, what does this do to oil prices in Alaska?
That's how Alaskans think, isn't it?
I mean,
ooh,
yeah.
War.
Yeah. Ooh. I was just wondering. I mean, worried about World War III, maybe, but yeah, it was really what was going on with our oil prices. I thought that was a great explanation, because I've been wondering about this, and I know that things are cyclical, and I know that after the Russia attack, that oil prices stabilized, in a fairly short period of time. But I thought that's an interesting take on how all that is going to lay out. Again, this is just another one of those things where there was, maybe there was a hopeful sigh of relief in Juneau, and then they realized that maybe it's not going to save all that they're going to do. We're going to have to do something about this.
Yeah, it really it added a lot of confusion, and I think that confusion's still there, to the governor's veto or the line item veto of education on K through 12 spending, citing the state's fiscal outlook, depressed fiscal outlook, or lower fiscal outlook, and then coming out with the revised revenue forecast that dropped prices down even further than they had been in the spring revenue forecast. And then the next day, or maybe it was later that same day, Iran starts, and prices spike, and so you have a lot of comments out there of keyboard warriors that say, oh my God, governor vetoes, but now prices are way up into the 70s, and we have all this extra revenue over what the spring forecast. How could he have done that? Well, of course,
Like,
he didn't know at the time.
like
He didn't know at the time they
Netanyahu.
were going to spike.
Yeah, like Netanyahu called Dunleavy and said, "By the way, your oil prices are going to spike, so don't veto anything because we're about to strike Iran." I mean, come on, it's ridiculous.
But even if you'd known that, you looking at, I mean, you've got to understand supply disruptions, and you've got to focus on supply disruptions. And I will say that Israel and Iran, Israel in its precision of targeting, and Iran in its response have sort of gone out of their way not to hit supply issues. I mean, Israel has hit internal domestic supply sources, energy supply sources for Iran, both on the gas side and the electric side, certainly, and on the and somewhat on the oil side. But Israel's gone out of its way not to attack the export facilities, and Iran's still continuing to export, and ships are picking it up and taking it out, and it just keeps on going. So as long as that happens, as you saw after 9/11, as you saw after Ukraine, after you saw after a lot of these things, as long as that happens and the market sort of sorts out, well, maybe we aren't going to have supply disruptions here. You'll see the market respond in a fairly short period of time. It doesn't take the market long to learn to absorb that information and then to incorporate it into prices.
Well, again, like I said, I hear something like this, and all I remember is that old bumper sticker that said, "God, please grant us another pipeline. We promise not to piss this one away." It's like we're constantly waiting to be saved by some kind of world event that changes everything instead of changing our own behavior. That's the key here.
Yeah, and the other thing, Michael, I mean, I'm reminded of a discussion we had last week or the week before. We Alaskans put ourselves in this position by predicating our budget on the futures market of the moment, right? We predicate spending, we predicate revenue, and then spending on whatever the futures market is telling us. And as we've talked about on the show before, what we should be doing is predicating revenues on an average of historic prices, just like we do on the PFD and just like we do on the POMV draw. We ought to be looking at what we've had in the past.
Welcome back to the program. The Michael Luke Show continues. It is Tuesday, which means it's Truth Tuesdays, the weekly top three from Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We continue on with our discussions. Number two, Brad says he's not going to hold his breath on the conclusions from the Education Task Force. I mean, gasp. I'm shocked when you look at the makeup of the task force. What are they going to discover? Brad, give us your thoughts here.
So one of the pieces of the education bill that passed over the governor's veto. I mean, we got a lot of vetoes going on here. We got a lot of bills going on, but we'll recall that there was an education bill that set the $700 BSA increase that the governor then line item vetoed in the budget. But the House bill, the fundamental House bill that set that passed, then was vetoed by the governor, then passed over veto and enacted over the veto. And so that bill still sits out there as the law. And one of the provisions of that we mostly talked about the increase in the BSA in that bill. One of the provisions of that set up a task force, an education task force composed of legislators to go in and look at the K through 12 system on a task force approach, and identify places where sort of in some ways the fundamental truths of the education system. Does it need more funding? Where does it need more funding? Does it need reform? Policy reform? Where does it need policy reform? Now, the task force has a credibility issue right off the get-go because of the members. You've got some very pro-education members that are in the majority on the task force, and limited minority membership. There's 6 members, 4 come from the majority, 2 from the majority in the Senate, 2 from the majority in the House. As you would expect, the House education chairman of both bodies are on the task force, and very pro-education members from other committees or on the task force for the majority. It's Mike Cronk from the Senate from the minority, and Jason Ruffridge from the House. So you can sort of guess where the conclusions are going to be, and so there's a credibility issue with the task force right off the beginning. But here's something that I think the task force actually could raise awareness on and include in its conclusions. And oddly enough, the idea for that came from an opinion piece by a couple of members of the chairman and a member of each of the Anchorage and Fairbanks school boards, who wrote an opinion piece that appeared in the ADN and the Fairbanks News Miner and elsewhere. The headline in the ADN is Governor Dunleavy's education veto shows a leadership crisis and Alaska's urgent need for a fiscal plan. And it's the last part of that, Alaska's urgent need for a fiscal plan, that I think's important. Actually, the editorial that they wrote doesn't go on to describe what they really mean by that. It gets mentioned again only in the last paragraph of the op-ed. But it triggered in my mind something that the Education Task Force can do, and that is frame the education issue as a sub issue of the overall fiscal issue the state is facing. I don't think you're ever going to get resolution on the K through 12 issue. I don't think you're ever going to get resolution on any issue that involves any long-term resolution on any issue that involves the budget, involves spending, until you have a fiscal plan in place. As long as we're floating along, dependent on what the futures market says about oil, dependent upon what the Permanent Fund Corporation investment policy is with respect to the permanent fund, as long as you're floating along with sort of a very unstable fiscal plan, I think you're always going to have unstable policy and unstable spending on the other side of the ledger. Those that depend upon the revenue side for spending, to fund spending, are always going to have uncertainty, as long as there's uncertainty on the revenue side. So I think it would be very helpful, and I guess I'm really appealing to Cronk and Ruffridge to make this point during the deliberations of the body. I think it would be very helpful if the Education Task Force said, look, one of the fundamentals that we've got to resolve before you can resolve education is to resolve the state's fiscal situation, one way or another. You've got to lay down a solid base on the fiscal side, on the revenue side, before we really will get resolution to what's going on over on the spending side, K through 12, or any other category of spending you want to address. We've got to get it resolved. We've got to get a stable base resolved on the revenue side. And I'm not arguing for increasing revenues or lowering revenues or any of that. You've got to get a solid base on the revenue side. And I think part of that is you got to go look at oil taxes. I think oil taxes are below the constitutional requirement of maximum contribution. And I think you've got to go look at oil taxes. I think you've got to go look at what the Permanent Fund Corporation is doing in terms of its investment policy. I think we're leaving $700 million, maybe $1 billion on the table, annual revenue, in terms of revenue from the investment policies that the Permanent Fund Corporation is pursuing. I'm not suggesting that we have the Education Task Force undertake to write a new oil tax code or to redirect the Permanent Fund Corporation in a way that improves its investment policy. But I am saying that I think it would be highly useful for the Education Task Force to say that one of the foundations of getting K through 12 or any spending policy right is getting a very stable fiscal revenue side in place. And I think that would be of service coming from this task force. Now, do I think they'll do it? Do I think the task force will make that a highlight? Probably not.
Right.
They'll want to highlight other things. But I think if Kronk and Ruffridge are there to contribute anything, I think it ought to be that sort of fundamental concept that we've got to get a fiscal plan, a solid fiscal plan in place before we really can address any of these issues on the spending side that people want to address.
No, and I think that this has been the problem. Again, this is the foundation of any home or pyramid or structure or whatever needs to be strong, and that's the problem. Is that our financial foundation is all over the place. We have no long-term plan, or every outlook is only till next year, or maybe the year after if it's forward looking at all. There is no 10-year plan. There is no long-term plan on any of this stuff. And so is it surprising that we run around like our hair's on fire every session to some new crisis? No, because they can't decide. And again, this all goes back in my mind to we have a serious spending problem. Now, can we cut our way to the solution? Probably not logistically. It would have to be some kind of step down approach. But the bottom line is that until we acknowledge that, we're not going to fix it. Whether we replace it with new revenues or whether we cut to it, until we even acknowledge it, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and certainly we would get pushback on from other members of the Education Committee task force on that issue. They would say, no, we have a revenue problem. My point here is what Alaska has done through various steps, focusing on the futures market being one of them, the oil futures market being one of them, is we have a very roller coaster, a very unsolid, a very unstable fiscal base. And as a consequence of that, and as we discussed in the show a few weeks ago, as a consequence of that, when you have these spikes in revenue, you get spikes in spending, you get new programs, you get new capital projects underway, you create new expectations, you create new constituencies that sort of don't go away when we go down the other side of the roller coaster and revenue sort of melts away. You've still got all of these programs, you've still got all this expectations of capital spending, you've still got all of these constituencies that are still out there that got built up during the peak periods, and they continue pressing even though revenue's melting away. I sort of, regardless of, and it's hard to say this because I know people come with their own preconceived notions about what the solution is, but sort of regardless of whether it's a spending problem or a revenue problem, we just need to have a solid base of revenue, and have a base that doesn't go on this roller coaster when oil futures prices or oil prices do what they do. We need to have a structure that takes any excess revenue over the base and puts it into some sort of stabilization fund to have it there to balance things out when current revenues go away because oil prices go down. Until we have that sort of solid base and see what that baseline is, and then build spending off that baseline. Until we have that, we're going to continue to have this debate, and we're going to continue to have, people say, oh, we need more spending, or we need less spending, or we need this, or we need that. We need to be more like a normal state, in the sense of having a baseline of a regular, predictable, solid baseline of revenue, and start from there, and then see what spending fits within that baseline. And I think the K through 12 task force, I think any task force that's focused on the spending side would do the state a service by saying, yes, we need to have that sort of solid base. One of the fundamentals of being able to figure out what to do on the spending side, whether we have too much, not enough, whatever. One of the things we need to do on the spending side to have the spending side under control is to have an expectation of a solid base on the revenue side.
Well, we know how much they pay attention to task force, right? I mean, the fiscal policy working group task. I mean, they did a lot of work, spent a whole summer that they can't get back, and yet they pretty much ignored everything that came out of that. So maybe we can just ignore whatever comes out of this group. I don't know. It would be nice to see an actual, commentary that says, hey, we need to have a fiscal plan and have somebody actually follow up with it. That's been part of the problem, is that, it's never been followed up on. Afterwards, we've probably gone through a dozen of these different, working groups or task forces or special committees or whatever, and they just never follow through on it. Why? Because it's easier to do what you've always done. And that's, until of course the piggy bank runs dry, and then what do you do? Final thoughts here, Brad, on this.
Well, we do have the fiscal policy working group. Jesse Keel is on that. Jesse Keel is on this task force. A hope would be that he would bring the learning from the fiscal policy working group over to the task force and talk about the need for that solid baseline. Whether Jesse's going to do that's probably not in the art of the possible. But I do think Cronk and Ruffridge I think that's what they can be. If they can be additive about anything, they can be additive about talking about needing to have a solid fiscal base before we really can have a solid discussion about education policy or anything else.
Well, you'll be happy to know, Brad, that Mike Cronk is in the chat room and saying, Brad, that is exactly what I told every single superintendent that came into my office and asked us to help, if they could help. I told them to help us implement a fiscal plan. I mean, I hope it happens. I'm again, cautiously optimistic that maybe something will come out of this. But again, two members of the minority versus the rest of them, and looking at the rest of the makeup, they're all very much pro spend. I don't know how much horsepower they're going to have in that room when it's all said and done.
Well, senators start every meeting, end every meeting with that statement, and at some point, it will be enough that people can't ignore you about it. I do think that it could be very helpful to continue to remind this task force or any task force of the need for a solid, predictable baseline that doesn't get spiked when oil prices go up. There's a way of taking that excess money and putting it into a stabilization fund, as opposed to creating more constituencies by spending it. I think there's a lot of helpfulness that can be used by reminding this task force and others that we need that as a baseline before we really can have useful discussions on spending policy.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I meing, like I was trying to say earlier, until we acknowledge that there's a problem, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. And that's what we've been running through for the last 35 years, is just, oh, there's no problem. Hey, we're $3 billion underwater. No big deal. We'll just take it out of our savings account and it'll be fine next year. And then it wasn't fine the next year, and it wasn't fine the next year. And every year it was $3 billion, $4 billion that they draw from CBR until there was no more money. And then they just, again, it's a classic game of avoidance of dealing with the issue that you are spending more money than you are taking in, period, full stop, end of sentence. And they don't want to even acknowledge that that's part of the problem.
Yeah, and not acknowledging. I mean, and both Republicans and Democrats do it. I mean, we had a price spike.
Absolutely.
We had a price spike 2 or 3 years ago when the Republicans were in charge of the legislature, and we had Republican co-chairs, and they spent it. They spent it on a capital budget, but they spent it, and it's. We've created expectations, we've created constituencies, we've created a sense of, hey, they got theirs, where's mine? We do all sorts of bad things to ourselves when we run this roller coaster when we run our state fiscal policy on this roller coaster of forward looking oil prices, and spending every cent we have and creating expectations we're going to continue to be able to spend those cents when we hit the downside.
Well, it's like I said, one of the things that we need to change is the way we budget. I mean, that was one of number 4 in the charter of changes is, we need to start looking at an average instead of predicting what's going to happen next year. We need to look back and say, what have we got in the last 5 or 6 years, the last 10 years? What is our average? Okay, then that's what we're going to budget on, and we should go from there. But we need a governor that has the fortitude to actually do that, right? I mean, that's the problem. I mean, we're laughing, but that's the problem.
Oh, Dunleavy's just been from a fiscal standpoint, Dunleavy's just been such a disappointment. I mean, this year's budget is a classic in terms of his proposed budget was a classic in terms of showing how bad it can be. The 10-year forecast showed, we have enough revenue and enough savings to get us through a couple of years, and then it's just one big red line from there on out. And as governor, I'm just going to throw it out there that way. I'm not going to try to propose any solutions to it. That's just the way I'm going to ride here. And that's, what did we elect the guy to do? We didn't elect the guy to do that. We elected him to actually come up with proposed solutions.
Yeah. No, it's definitely for us. And I'll, in all honesty, of doing this for 25 years, all I could say is it's been the most frustrating thing, because this has been the one thing that I have been pointing to for 25 years, that you can't continue to spend more than you take in and expect it's going to work out okay. Math doesn't work that way, right? We can't work with negative integers on a budget basis. And unfortunately, they all just, it's fine. Why are you so down? Why are you so negative? It'll be great. It'll be fine. And yet here we are. Like you said, the big red line. That's why we all wore the red shirts today. The big red line, right?
Well, and then you have things like Israel, Iraq, right? And people are Israel, Iran, and people say, "Oh, well, see, we're going to be bailed out again. Look at those prices, spike," and sort of forget that they come back down, and that OPEC is on a drive to take control of the market again at a lower price point. It's just it is frustrating. It is frustrating to be on this roller coaster, which is what we've been on.
We're continuing now. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top 3. We're saved, Brad. We're saved. They're going to build an AK LNG. You heard him say it. The president said we're going to do it. We're saved. Of course, you and I, who've been following this issue, you for a lot more than I have, but have been following this issue, know that this is, again, one of those pie crust promises, easily made, easily broken, right? And yet we continue to hear about all these deals. Now, Japan may have gone maybe a little more solid on the record. I don't know. Tell us about this decision from JERA and who JERA is, and give us the rundown here.
So JERA is the biggest Japanese LNG purchaser. There are a number of Japanese LNG purchasers. JERA is the one that purchases, sort of a consortium that purchases for the electric utilities in Japan, and is the biggest purchaser of Japanese LNG, or imports of LNG into Japan. A couple of weeks ago, or maybe last week we talked about, the thing that surprised me the most, or the thing that happened, the thing that was most important about the Governor's Sustainability Conference, Energy Sustainability Conference, was the thing that didn't happen. And the thing that didn't happen was this big signing party that I think people had looked toward when you had the members of the Trump administration up here. I think there was a hope, and by some an expectation, that there was going to be a big signing party where the Japanese, Koreans, and Taiwanese came in and signed, binding letters of intent, or maybe even not binding letters of intent, but at least letters of intent at the sustainability conference around LNG. There had been a lot of discussion about, there was going to be a summit, an LNG summit in Alaska in the early weeks of June. timed with the Governor's Sustainability Conference. We were going to have members of the administration up here, of the Trump administration up here to represent the administration. We were going to have representatives of Japan and Korea and others up here, and we were going to have a big signing party. And I think that what we talked about last week was the biggest news out of the sustainability conference was the thing that didn't happen, which is that we didn't have that signing party. Well, I didn't know at the time, but turns out there was going to be a signing party, but it didn't involve AKLNG. This past week, there was an announcement by JERA and others, and a big signing party that the Secretary of Interior and the Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, were at. It was a signing party that involved JERA, the big Japanese purchaser, making a big shift, announcing a big shift in supply sources from Australia to the U.S. And a significant commitment by JERA to U.S. supplies as it, to use its terms, rebalanced its supply from Australian focused to more U.S. focused. Big signing party down in Houston, attended by a number of people, with JERA signing 4 agreements, 4 LNG supply agreements with 4 suppliers, all of which are located in the U.S. Gulf Coast. No Alaska at all. Not even a piece of it out of the 4. Not even a piece of the 4 agreements is Alaska oriented. And so I think, coupled with the non-event at the sustainability conference, coupling that with the event that occurred with the signing party down in Houston involving JERA, I think we've got to see the writing on the wall about the Alaska LNG project. How JERA pitched this was, look, we are realigning or rebalancing our supply portfolio from Australia focused to U.S. focused, to an increased U.S. focus. We are signing agreements, significant agreements, for offtake agreements with U.S. suppliers, these 4 U.S. suppliers. We are focusing on the U.S. We are improving our trade relations with the U.S. We have the Secretary of Interior and the Secretary of Energy down at the signing party talking about how important it is and how great it is to have this U.S. focus, and for Alaska not even to have a piece of that is very telling. If you can't, when JERA is intentionally rebalancing from Australia to the U.S. and it's signing agreements to implement that rebalancing, if Alaska and JERA is the largest LNG purchaser, Japanese LNG purchaser, if Alaska can't even get a piece of that, can't even get a piece of the market for the largest Japanese LNG purchaser, I don't know. I really don't know what hope there is for saying that you're going to be able to bring this project together. So the signing party down in Houston hasn't gotten a lot of press up here, or any press up here. But my gosh, when I saw the headlines of it, that is probably more significant news, for Alaska LNG than any piece of news, including the fact that Glenfarne had entered into contracts, is probably the most significant news for Alaska LNG in the past 6 months, certainly, and possibly the past year.
Right.
And it's not the news you would want it to be.
No, because logistically, again, it's a straight shot from Alaska. All this other stuff is coming from the Gulf Coast of Texas, which means it has to come through the canal or around the Horn or wherever they're bringing it. And so you would think it's a straight shot from Alaska. You'd think it would be easy, even if it's and those are all non-binding agreements, right? Those are all head of agreements. So they were
there's two of them that are binding. 2 of them that are non-binding.
Where they're binding. So, and we're talking about, this is like 5 million tons per year. This is a significant amount. Even if they had just said, we'll break off a million tons per year for Alaska, it would have been something. But I think everybody's looking at this and going, no, not gonna happen. I just, that's how I read it at this point.
Yeah, I mean, JERA isn't saying this, and it doesn't. It's not all of JERA's demand, but this is a shift of 20% of JERA's demand from Australia to Alaska. U.S. goes from 10% up to 30% as a result of these agreements, and JERA wants to. I mean, they're making the point that we want to rebalance because we want supply diversity. And you've also got, I mean, so they're keeping Australia as a part of it. They've got the Middle East as a part of it, a big part of it. And now they're saying we've got the U.S. as a big part of it. So at some point, I mean, JERA is going to say, look, we've filled the U.S. quota. We filled in this portfolio of diversity. We've filled what we want out of the U.S. with these agreements. We've rebalanced to get what we want out of the U.S. In these agreements. There isn't anything left or anything significant left in their demand. And if you're not, I mean, if this is the largest LNG purchaser in Japan and they don't have anything left for Alaska, how the heck are you ever going to bring this off? So it is major. It is just like the biggest news out of the sustainability conference was, the event that didn't happen. The biggest event for Alaska LNG is the event that did happen that nobody's talking about in Alaska because it didn't happen up here. It happened down in
right. Didn't happen up here, and it didn't mention us, and nobody's inferring the context of that. And that's part of the problem here is that we've got to, this does not paint a rosy picture of the AK LNG project when it's all said and done. As much as people want and dream, and I mean, I was on the LNG bandwagon for many years until I really started getting into it and looking at, again, the economics and the different reports and talking with you over the years. And, I just like, I would love to have it, but we've got to be realistic. We've got to make plans. We got to base it on the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario is it's not going to come through. And
that's not only the worst case scenario, it's also the most realistic,
right? The most likely scenario. Yeah, exactly.
And every once in a while you sort of spike and say, okay, we are the closest to Japan. And it would be, you would have a savings in terms of time. You would have a savings in terms of money. You would have a savings or you would have benefits in terms of security because you wouldn't have to either go through the canal or go around the horn. And so, yeah, we do have an advantage there, but to have that in successive weeks, have that not acknowledged basically by the absence of a signing party during the Alaska Sustainability Conference. And then sort of right in your face the following week, have JERA go down and sign 4 agreements. Couldn't even break off one for Alaska. 4 agreements with Gulf Coast, U.S. Gulf Coast producers. Even the most optimistic, even the most rah cheerleading AK LNG person out there has got to say, wait a second, maybe this closeness issue isn't all it's cracked up to be. No, maybe that's not going to be the thing that saves us.
Brad, 60 seconds here. Final thoughts.
Well, Michael, oil prices are up, but oil prices are going to come back down. Alaska LNG isn't going to save us. We've got to talk about fiscal policy as part of the education task force. We've got to put this all in the proper context of we can only spend what we have.
Yeah, we've got to. And we've got to acknowledge that there is an issue. And until we address that, we're just going to be like those, we're just going to continue on blithely with business as usual, because that's the course of least resistance at this point. It's just continuing on as we've been doing. But we know that it's not going to work out for us in the end. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. You can find him on Facebook, on Twitter, and at ak4sb.com. Go argue with him on Twitter. He loves that. He needs more of that in his life. Brad, thank you so much.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me. Well, that's a wrap for another week's edition of the weekly top 3 from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you again for joining us. Remember that you can find past episodes on our YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, and keep track of us during the week on Facebook and Twitter. This has been Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We look forward to you joining us again next week on the Weekly Top 3.